Welcome to Utopian Horizons.
Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Utopian Horizons, a podcast about utopias real and imaginary. I've been saying I'm trying to get the gaps down between episodes, and this one has come quicker than the last one, so that's good. Also, for the first time, I've already got the interview recorded for the next episode, so there definitely won't be a big gap between this one and the next one. I'll probably put that out in a couple of weeks or something. Anyway, this episode is going to be covering a dystopian film called Kamikaze 89, despite me promising to cover some less obscure stuff, which I will be doing, but I do think it's interesting to do stuff that people haven't necessarily heard of as well. I hadn't heard of this film until I was introduced to it by my guest on this episode. That's Sean McTiernan, who I'm aware of through a podcast he does called All Units. All Units is a film podcast where he's kind of doing like a anatomy of the thriller genre thing, like breaking down the genre with a different theme and different films as he goes through each episode. We go into a bit of detail on exactly what he's doing at the end of our conversation, but I'll just say now it's a really interesting and intelligent podcast, and I don't think it's a million miles away from the kind of thing I'm doing with this podcast. So if you like this, I think it might be worth you checking that out, because I think you'll probably like it. So just search for All Units on iTunes or whatever you use to listen to your podcast, and you should be able to find it. Quickly, before I get on to the conversation with Sean, a bit of news on the podcast. I've started a Patreon, which for anyone who doesn't know is a thing that allows people to give contributions of money to people for the work that they do. It's set up as a monthly thing, but you can cancel it at any time. So you can, if you just want to give a one-off donation, you can set it up and then cancel it straight away. All I'm looking to do at the moment is cover the hosting costs of the podcast, which is €9 a month. So not a lot of money at all. I'm just trying to make it so basically the podcast isn't costing me money. So if you can afford to give me a bit of money and you think what I'm doing is worthwhile, that would be great. If you don't want to, that's also fine. I'm not going to be locking anything off. I'm still going to be keeping the podcast completely free. So nothing's changing in that respect. If I do end up getting more than €9 a month, that would be great. A lot of work does go into this, and as I work as a freelancer, I do often end up spending time that I could and probably should be spending earning money on doing this podcast instead. And with like normally entails like reading books, doing research, taking notes, finding interviewees, arranging times to do the interview, doing the interview, editing the podcast. It does take a lot of time. So if you do think that what I'm doing is worthwhile, mind giving me a couple of quid for that, that would be great. If I do end up making more money than the €9, I do want to think about things that I could give you back in return for the money that you're giving to me. I don't know what that could be. Perhaps something like if people make a certain contribution, they can choose a subject for a future episode. I don't know if that would work or not, but perhaps people feel that if I'm getting a certain amount of money, I should be producing a certain amount of episodes without a certain amount of time. I don't know. If you've got any ideas on what you would want in return for your money, then please let me know. I'm open to this changing based on what you tell me you want. Just email me on utopianhorizonspod@gmail.com, tweet me at Utopian Horizons, whatever. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you'd want to change. Let me know how you want it to work, and I can potentially change it to do that. If you do want to have a look at that, it's patreon.com/Utopian Horizons. As I said before, if you don't want to give me any money or can't afford it, that's fine too. If you could instead give the podcast a rating or review on iTunes, or tweet about it, tell someone you think might like it instead, that would be great as well. Okay, that's enough of that. On to my conversation with Sean about Kamikaze 89. So joining me now is Sean McTiernan. Thanks for joining me, Sean.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Sean, I'm familiar with Sean from a podcast he does, a film podcast called All Units. So I asked Sean about a film that he might like to talk about that's utopian or dystopian. So first thing I wanted to ask is why you chose this particular film, which is Kamikaze 89. What of all the films you could have chosen, what made you pick that one?
To be annoying, I suppose, is a big thing.
Okay.
Well, no, not really. There are a lot of dystopian and utopia. There's a lot of stuff that comes to mind when I think of that. But this specific movie is interesting to me for a lot of reasons. It is sort of cyberpunk, but not cyberpunk.
Yeah.
But it is also often if you read a lot of reviews of this, it's often people saying, ignore the story, just look at the star of the movie. The star of the movie is Rainer Werner Fassbinder, so one of my favorite artists in any medium. I would say he was a film director in Germany in the 70s, and he was very prolific, controversial, and very quickly he was very dead. He died when he was 37. But this is his last. This movie came out a month after he died, and his central performance in this movie is very, very famous. He's sort of this lumbering, perspiring, deadpan figure in a leopard skin suit. We can go into his character a bit later on, but sure. So all the reviews I have ever read before I saw this movie were like, ignore the story, just watch Fassbinder. But then I actually watched it, and I thought the story was very interesting. Right? It is, especially in light of the reviews. So the start of the movie says that Germany has become the greatest superpower in the world. There's no crime.
Industry solved all problems. There's no unemployment.
Yeah. And what is interesting to me about that is so many of the reviews of this film are like, just state that as fact. Yeah. You know? They're like, yeah, no, that's what's happened. Instead of maybe the entire film is supposed to undermine that initial assertion, right? I
mean, it's almost obvious as soon as it gives you the setup, everything is perfect. It's obvious almost from then that it's not going to be, surely.
Yeah, you would hope. Yeah. But I think a lot of it has to do with, so this film, the costumes are very sort of kind of sci-fi on a budget. Return to Oz feels like a kind of a similar thing, or Liquid Sky or something like that, kind of early 80s punk sci-fi. But it's obviously not everything is not fine, you know, and he, Fassbinder, plays this detective who is investigating a bomb threat in the building that produces all of the media in the country, like that owns 100% of all media in the country and controls, it's basically implied through that, controls everything about the country.
Just before we get to like the details of the plot, perhaps if we just give people a kind of idea of like the contours of this world. So as you said, we get this set up like everything's perfect, or there's no unemployment, blah, blah, blah. The reality of it, obviously it's a decaying world, a world of scarcity. It looks really empty. Like there's loads of scenes where he like looks in rooms at people and there's like almost no furniture and it's like paint peeling off the walls. I mean, you talked about it being like cyberpunk, but not. It's interesting, like Blade Runner's obviously this vision of a world that's decayed, but it's a future that's already happened decaying, whereas this film looks like our world decayed, if you see what I mean.
Definitely, yes. Yeah, no, that is a really good distinction actually to draw, and I think that setting part of the film is quite important because so there's Alphaville. I don't know if you've seen Alphaville, the Jean-Luc Godard movie.
I've seen a bit of it, but I haven't seen the whole thing. But
yeah, I mean, it's just the setting is that it was, you know, it filmed what was contemporary and said, you know, and said it as a sci-fi setting, which is a very like glib Godard joke, right? But it's basically like saying here, sci-fi is obviously about the here and now, so I'll just show you that. But yeah, no, it's like that as well, and partially that's to do with budget, right? But the other half, as you say, is all of this emptiness because and a lot of this is made clearer in the book this is based on, which is called Murder on the 31st Floor. But there's all this kind of boasting about low birth rates outside marriage. There's a lot of there's this suggestion you never see normal people in this movie. Like everybody is either part of this kind of media conglomerate, or they're part of the government. There are no normal people, and you see them kind of being herded by sort of militarized psychiatrists into a van at some stage.
Yeah.
That's about it. And there is a suggestion. I mean, one of the great tip-offs that this presentation that everything is good is possibly spurious is how there are no more suicides in Germany. But there are a huge amount of quote-unquote accidental deaths.
Or with my bad translation that I had an unexpected exodus. Which I kind of like that phrase.
Yeah, I think unexpected exodus is quite a good phrase as well, because it's very bureaucratic, right? And like, it approaches it from a different angle, but this is kind of really that classic bureaucracy kind of overwhelming everything.
Yeah, that twisting of language is, I guess, one that you just of the time this was made, where you'd still have the Cold War, that's something you'd associate with like totalitarian communism, this rephrasing of stuff where it's obvious what it really means, but you can't say what it really means.
Yeah, exactly.
We still have that though in different forms, like enhanced interrogation techniques, and which means torture, obviously.
Yeah.
And so on.
No, it was very, because I read some of the book again to prepare for this, and it was totally accidental, but there was a description of the amount of power people were willing to give the government to stop perceived moral indiscretions. Because the book is so tied into this time limit that he has 4 days to solve this murder. It was this big paragraph about how, that this fake morality had been able to give the government more and more power. They couldn't divorce from it. And then, like, he looks at his watch and it's 8:17, right? But it said it's 2017, and it was very, like, it was a bit cheesy, but it was very striking to me. They basically described what was happening and then said it's 2017.
Yeah.
Which I think might be on purpose. There are definitely, when he's saying like, "Oh, this is happening," there in that chapter in the book that kind of explains the whole plot, which happens in this film in a scene with Franco Nero that is no more emphasis is put on it than anything else, so it kind of just drifts past. But that scene happens to be around the time where it's going through years of the 20th century, but in like hours, if you know what I mean. Okay. But yeah, no, the idea that words are forced into meaning other things, or the, accidental exodus, or whatever, is like, that is a big theme of the book, or the film as well. You look at this film, right, and it's Fassbinder pouring with sweat. Always leopard print is kind of his signature, right? He wears a leopard print suit, and then when he's playing tennis in the police disco, he wears like a leopard print jogging outfit, and then he's got a leopard print like car as well, I seem to remember. But all of this is sort of this gestured individuality, but really, like, his character, and the character that, again, in the book, but also in the film, is taken on because he always solves his case. And that's a very classic, detective fiction thing. This guy always solves his case. But you get a sense by the end what that actually means is he always resolves the case, if you know what I mean. Like, he always finds somebody to prosecute. Like, he's not pinning it on everybody, but he does. They needed somebody to be guilty, so they picked him.
Yeah. What do you make of the fashion thing? Like, it's not just him, like, in his leopard print skin. There's a guy wearing like a pink cowboy outfit. Like, everyone's dressed in like completely bizarre manner. Like you said, there's no like normal people. It reminded me. I don't know if you ever read Ubik, but
the Philip K. Dick book.
Yeah,
I think so.
It reminded me of, there's this scene, and it's not important, I think, but there's a moment where he just describes what people are wearing, and he just seems to pick up the most random like bits of clothing, like, those hats with propellers on that you only see in cartoons.
Yes.
Like, someone's wearing that, like, I don't know what you'd call it, like completely bizarre, like postmodern dress. And also, obviously, Philip K. Dick's got an obsession with decaying places and like entropy. So yeah, it made me think of that. But yeah, sorry, I'm getting off point. But what do you make of that fashion thing? Like, is it just like sci-fi low budget thing?
Well, so I think like Wolff Graham, right, the guy who ostensibly directed this, even though I think there's pretty much consensus that Fassbinder did an Orson Welles and took it over.
Okay.
You can really see like his cinematographer Xavier Schwarzenberger. There's a thing Fassbinder does which is like kind of associated with Michael Bay now, where he spins around people while they're talking. There's a lot of that in this movie. But I think the clothes, so I always think when I see dystopian fiction or something like that, and when it's low budget, right, they want to make the film look appealing. They have what they have on hand, so they kind of make weird outfits. Like Mr. Freedom's a good example of that, actually, as well, the William Friedkin movie. But what I always think is, it's not, in the future, the future's ridiculous because people are wearing these ridiculous outfits. It's more, fashion is arbitrary. Like, it's a short line to say, like, fashion is really important and everything like that, but what we're wearing is as strange. You can make what they're wearing out of what we're wearing, and it's iterative. That's the thing. Like, whenever you're looking at it, it's an iteration of what is happening now. Like, and that's a big thing, I think, to focus on something like these, utopian or dystopian society, dystopian as presented here, is that it is very easy. It is about to happen. Is the thing. Even those ridiculous outfits, as outlandish as they are, and like another thing to remember about the outlandish outfits in this movie is that they're all worn by the richest people in the country, right? Like almost everybody you see is one of the people at the top of society, and they're able to, the idea is there's this like total death of culture in the movie as well.
Yeah.
So that's kind of being emphasized. I think, the leopard skin print suit definitely reminds me of, like when cops have like Punisher logos on their police cars,
right?
Something like that. That's like this ostensibly it's this kind of, rebellious individualistic thing, but it really is just, this is just what I'm doing, but I am going to 100% be a manifestation of state power or whatever, which is definitely what he does, because he does in the book, they make a big point. Sorry I keep talking about the book, but the book is a lot more clear than the film and story points, but you can see it throughout the film. He doesn't arrest anybody, he tells other people to arrest people. He doesn't kill anybody. Well, people die and he tells people that's a accidental exodus or whatever, but he is fulfilling his role throughout, and how he acts is this, it's interesting because the guy, like the story is actually would lend itself more to a very drab setting, I think, like that the setting would match the outfits, but I do think low budget sci-fi, in the end of the day, does lend itself to like wear a plastic mohawk and a hockey jersey and we'll put this on the poster kind of thing.
Yeah, so let's get on to what he's doing and the basic plot. So, as you said, there's this place called the Concern, which is the place where media is produced. No one else produces media. They have 100% control. There's a bomb threat there, and this guy, the police guy who's called Jansen, is given 4 days to solve who's behind it. So basically, there's not actually a bomb. Well, it's not clear, but at this point, we think there wasn't actually a bomb. So he's trying to solve the hoax, basically.
Yes, yeah.
Which is kind of weird that the importance is placed on this investigation, right? Like, it's a bomb hoax. Like, nothing's happened. But the chief of police is involved. They've got their best man on the job. So I thought that was kind of strange.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think one part of it is they keep emphasizing how much it costs.
Yeah, they don't want to evacuate the building.
Yeah, because it cost them, I think it's $2 million, they say in the movie, that it cost them to evacuate the building and then unevacuate it. It actually reminded me of the scene in one of the first episodes of Twin Peaks where they shut down the sawmill and all they can talk about is how much it cost to shut it down and start it up again. But so part of it is that, but I think like it becomes clear as the movie goes on why, this is part of something that's being set up, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the movie doesn't really make that easy for you, right? No. Like, because everything is delivered in such this deadpan way. You're like, is this important or what? And like, it's also extremely like weird and ridiculous, and Fassbinder's talking to people on like video phones and stuff. But it is definitely this sense of, this has to be resolved because this can't happen again. Because not because this can't happen again. This can't happen. Like, they don't report it in any of the media. Obviously, they own the media or whatever. But even when he's arriving at the scene, he gets a call from his superior and it says, turn your sirens off, And there's this emphasis that, like, he's in plain clothes, not because he's this rebellious kind of figure. He's in what his version of plain clothes because the police have to be invisible. Like, the only uniformed kind of force you see are these sort of militarized psychiatrists, which definitely the idea that they're helping people because, as they allude to, drinking is illegal in this society, but it is also, there's endemic alcoholism, which you kind of get the sense that they're using to, like, mass enslave people. And he himself, Jensen, he's also an alcoholic. So even when the Combine guy looks him up on a computer during the investigation, it shows all of his commendations and everything, and then it fully says on the computer he's an alcoholic, which is totally illegal, But it is this odd kind of Shaggy Dog story of him going around, and having watched this a couple of times, there are story points that would like be crucial to follow the investigation that are given less than no weight. Like, he's talking to some guy and he asks him what scissors he uses to cut up the thing that the ransom note is written on,
Yeah, I didn't get that.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's torn by hand. So the guy admits to it, and he's of the level where you can tell taking this fall, like a kind of very traditional gangster movie thing, or indeed like a key part of one of the seasons of The Thick of It. If you take a fall at a certain level, you can come back, with all that kind of credibility. So he encounters a guy kind of trying to do that he's able to discount. But as you go through, you see this, his emphasis, and again, it's weird because this performance, and it is a fantastic performance by Fassbinder, right? And it's his last big performance, and is one of his only starring role in someone else's film. But he is not being rebellious. Like, he even says to his second in command, who's another guy who's in a lot of Fassbinder movies, his catchphrase is avoid unnecessary remarks, right? That's what he says to people whenever any kind of exciting semi-Sherlock Holmes sort of, theories are being thrown around. He just says avoid unnecessary remarks.
Yeah.
And that is a cool thing, right? That's cool that he says that, and it's funny. But kind of towards the end, you realize, he's following a pattern and a system. Like, he's not, like, the idea that he won't think creatively about motives or anything isn't just a throwaway thing. It's like central to why he was picked. This sort of efficiency in a certain direction, if you know what I mean. Like, this he is not picked because he is this eccentric that solves crimes no one else can. He is picked because he is very effective at creating a narrative, right? Which is kind of what the company do as well. The whole thing is about creating this narrative for people, and that is indeed what the film is about as well. This sort of giant corporation who controls everything. They need, and maybe they don't, it just doesn't need to be reported on, but there is a feeling that they should create a story for what they eventually do at the end that makes sense.
I found it quite difficult to understand his motivations at times, because, so as you said before, he's like kind of a classic noir detective character in a way, like lonely existent, lives for the job, alcoholic. So so there's this idea that all he cares about is his perfect case record. As you mentioned, he's got all these convictions for catching people drinking alcohol despite being alcoholic. So yeah, he wants to fulfill this perfect record. But at the same time, there's points where he seems to be offered like a way out of the case as you move towards the end, and he doesn't seem to be interested in taking it. So it was never quite clear to me. Right, on one level, it seemed like he didn't care about the truth. He cared about just getting through and keeping his record, but he didn't seem to want to take the way out that he was offered.
Yeah, so I think that is partially bad filmmaking, right? Might be partially to blame for there. But I also think that there is an element of, and again, it ties into the outfits and it ties into a lot of this stuff, that if you work to uphold a system like this, you want to be the one guy who doesn't. You want to be the one person, and a lot of these systems and like these societies, where everything is supposed to be perfect or whatever, thrives by, and this is again the big theme at the end of the film, or the big reveal, by encouraging a certain level of rebelliousness. And a little bit of it to me feels like that, where it's like, well, I'm going to keep going with this. He feels like he's kind of doing this rogue thing, but really this is part of, again, the structure. Does that make sense, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah. He's sort of, because he's kind of presented as like he's this slightly like rogue. Like, he won't answer calls from the chief and stuff. He's like, I do what I want. I'm like a maverick, but at the same time, so yeah, he wants to almost fulfill that role, but at the same time, he's never going to, because he's just we can see that he's a hypocrite. That's made obvious. So it's quite clear that really he can't perform that role that he might like to. There's a weird scene where he kind of murders a guy as well. After there's a chase in the concern building. It's not quite clear what happens there to me. He's chasing this guy. He manages to hit him with one shot, I think, because there's some blood like on something. And then the guy gets in a forklift and starts driving towards him. And then there's like a gunshot, but I don't think that he fired it. And then the guy stops But again, was that bad? Was that bad filmmaking? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like I don't want to continually tell you that you're right, but you are. Like, if you're ever watching this movie and you're like, "Why did that happen?" It's because Wolff Graham might not be the best person in the world at making movies.
But then still, it's kind of a weird scene, isn't it? Because the guy is then stops, and then he just like unloads his gun into him, shot after shot, and then just gives him the police salute, which is a thumbs up. Just standing there.
Yeah, and he goes past him on a conveyor belt or something, because he salutes his way, which is the thumbs up, out of the screen, and you get the feeling again that's going to be an accidental death. I mean, the scene where the guy he knocks into the guy and the guy crashes the car, and he stops and he turns around to his colleague and says, "That's an overdose." Is like, that's kind of his attitude to killing people. Like, it's just like, well, this is just going to happen. Yeah. But I do think the idea that this salute and this show of pride, especially because the Z Kyle or whatever is now a thumbs up, which is not the most subtle thing in the world, but hey, like the idea that is a grim joke, that this authority and this whole belief system is a total fucking grim joke, and like you can just give that salute to somebody you've just killed, that isn't registered as a murder. That definitely occurred to me when I was watching that, that he's sort of, again, he has that level. Part of reaching his level is you're allowed to think, 15% of it or 20% of it is a grim joke, and as you go up the power structure, you realize more and more of it is totally meaningless. Like, you can often measure powers in these kind of super corporations or kind of fascist corporation things in sci-fi by how much the person realizes everything is a lie. But like, no, I will say, and the people shouting Cosmopampus at him,
I was going to ask you about that. So there's Cosmopampus or whatever it is vaguely defined, but is an enemy to the concern. So the guy in charge of the concern is called the Blue Panther, and we know there's somebody called Cosmopampus who's an enemy. And there's a comic that kind of depicts battles between Cosmopampus and Blue Panther, and there seems to be some kind of conflation between Cosmopampus and Janssen. As you say, people keep shouting at him, and there's one of the comics actually depicts him as Cosmopampus. Why are they being conflated? Is that like the what's the group called? The kind of the revolution group, the Procos?
Oh yes.
Yeah, is that them mistaking his potential to like deliver justice and fulfill like a symbolic role of Cosmopampus or something?
I think so. I do think that mistaking him for the idea. So he meets the guy that draws the comic, right? And that guy immediately tries to kill himself because when you create these narratives, you may not actually want them to, end up at your door or whatever. But yeah, no, there's definitely that sense of potential, that they think, oh, like, is he this guy that is going to embody the... Again, it's not 100% clear, but I do think that it does, again, come into the end of the movie that there's an idea that you can apply to someone, or there's a feeling of maybe overthrowing something, there's this kind of, and the fact that it's done through a comic is very purposeful as well, that there is a state-created kind of revolutionary idea you can adopt. And again, he is this outwardly rebellious figure. He's a bit quite like Judge Dredd in a way, because it's this really outsized character that when you really think about it is just this blank face of kind of fascist whatever. But yeah, the Cosmopampus thing is I think part of it is just the idea that all of culture has been so ground down that instead of people having, like in La Chinoise or whatever, having massive, political arguments that, that cells can have these massive political arguments and disagreements about Bakunin or whatever. Instead, they're just shouting like Batman, basically, at people. That's, I think one of the things that stands with Wolff Graham not being the best director in the world is inanity is a very potent weapon in this narrative or whatever, and it definitely comes up a couple of times, this enforced inanity. So okay,
what about, so another very important element is the 31st floor, which right at the beginning after the bomb threat, somebody says something about it being the 31st floor, and someone else just says, "Oh, that's just a joke. We always blame stuff that goes wrong on the 31st floor. It doesn't exist." So a lot of the film actually revolves around him looking for the 31st floor in the concern. It always seems to have like a magical dimension at time, in the sense that it wasn't clear whether it existed or not, if you see what I mean.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. And that's the air of myth about it is perpetuated by a lot of people, and it's interesting again that they mention it jokingly, but then when questioned about it, they kind of trail off, and even one of the people who talk about it ends up as an accidental death fairly quickly afterwards. But yeah, the 31st floor, I mean, he goes in there at one stage and doesn't see anything. And I think that might be, again, I might be being very generous to the film here, but I think his inability to actually perceive what would be in the 31st floor is part of it, right? Like, he can't, so what the 31st floor is, right? This is technically spoiling the movie. I think this movie's basically unspoilable.
Yeah, it's fine to.
In fact,
I don't understand this movie, so I want you to spoil it. So
okay, so right, so sorry, I picked this one. I should have picked
I liked it.
Well, that's good. So right, so the 31st floor is when this company bought up every media outlet, every paper, big or small or whatever. It's just papers in the book, but it's all media outlets in the film. They went around to all these key and the public intellectual guys who were against the government, so there were like philosophers or people who were speaking out against state power in a particular way. I think this idea probably would have been made a bit more sense when these people were still on television, as they used to be when this movie was made or whatever. But they went to all these people and said, "Oh, we're not going to shut you down. We're actually going to keep you, or we will offer you to be in this publication. You can make this publication, and of all these great minds, unlimited budget, but we have to approve it. But you can say whatever you want. You can do the most outlandish stuff possible."
And they tell them it will kind of be like an opportunity to almost like an opportunity for cultural renewal. Like, they can produce something amazing that will really impact society.
Yeah, they're told this is what you want to do, and we'll help you. It's good for society if we have this kind of thought. So they're all bought up into the 31st floor and they start working on it. And there is a point made in both film and book, I think, that it takes them a long time to agree on anything, which is a pretty cruel joke, but it is true to life that all these outsized revolutionary guys are all massively disagreeing about everything. Yeah. But and eventually they get on it, they produce this book and they bring it to the guys, none of their ideas get censored. The big emphasis that none of the ideas get censored, but they say, we want this to be even better. So go back and work on it. We want to make the printing process better. And eventually it becomes apparent that they're never going to release the paper. Mm. And they have actually put all of the public intellectuals, or anybody that would speak out, anybody who is anti-authoritarian or whatever, or has these ideas, they've circuited them or put them in the 31st floor. And so it's in the book, they're told, oh, it has to be profitable, obviously, don't worry about it, but it has to be profitable for us to keep using it. And they all agree with that, but it's fine. But because they never release it, they only keep doing these test print runs. They manage to put everybody in the 31st floor in massive debt as well. So the one guy who gets out, Franco Nero, who is the guy, it turns out, who sent the fake threat because he wanted to bring attention to the 31st floor, he only gets out because he has an inheritance and he's able to pay off this bill, and it's total happenstance, So they're all in debt. All of the kind of rebellious or whatever thought or, individual thought in the country is in this 31st floor, working away, producing these, really interesting ideas and fantastic publications that on purpose nobody is seeing. So it kind of reminds me of stuff like the Red Bull Music Club, the Red Bull Music Academy? No. So that's this thing where it is really, really interesting long-form interviews with musicians that would never get an interview like that otherwise, and they do all these articles and everything like that, but it is still owned by Red Bull, and there is this idea of when corporations buy indie kind of producers or indie media and just tell them, oh, just do what you would be doing anyway. And, that's YouTube, that's whatever. But if you introduce that idea of the profit motive or introduce that level of corporate control, one of the things about Kamikaze 89 and Murder on the 31st Floor is its censorship. It's not direct censorship, it's not like, classic, like what every dad in a comment section says, oh, Stalin, erasing people from history. Yeah. It's enforced. Listen, this is just for the good of everybody. Like in the book, they point out that they edit violence out of football matches and it's not, nobody is telling them, but it's just, it would be better. And this idea of morality, people self-censor, like you see now in newspapers in the UK, partially because internships and whatever have taken hold so much, only people of a certain class can be in newspapers, and because you don't get paid enough, you're making a reputation as much as a living. So people naturally want to enforce this idea that they're right, and that, that this and they feel kind of paternalistic because they've been chosen. And this idea that you can risk your neck and then go right somewhere else is a lot less prevalent, or that you would have actually experienced any of the things you write about, so that element of risk goes out of it as well, or that element of actual experience. And this kind of remove is what they're cultivating in Kamikaze 89. They have this room full of these people producing this stuff, and they just won't do anything with it. It's the ultimate cruel trick, right? They're like, you can have an endless budget, you just have to compromise, but the compromise is no one reads it.
Yeah, it's quite prescient in that sense. Like you would expect, as I say, because at the time you still would have had like East Germany and communism, saying the temptation was B2C, to think of censorship in that old way you talked about, like literally you can't do that, you can't say that is censored, that can't be printed, whereas this is a much more sophisticated form of censorship, which is far more relevant to what I think we experience today. I think it's not something that just applies to media. Like there's this idea, isn't there, that there's this debate within politics as to what you can do like inside the system, and I think the film's definitely trying to say something about working within the system and becoming complicit. The idea, we need to work from the inside to change things, but sometimes when you work from within the system, that neuters your ability to actually do anything worthwhile, which I think is kind of what the 31st Floor is meant to be about.
Yeah, no, there's definitely an idea. I mean, no one wants to feel like they've sold out, right? Everybody wants to feel like they've bought in. They're investing. Like they're in the system because they're doing something. It's that thing we spoke about previously, that everybody wants that 5% of rebellious streak. They want to wear the pattern socks or the wacky tie or whatever while still following the dress code, and that idea of working within the system and what you can do within the system. It's why ACAB is like not just a phrase, but it is like a legitimate political platform in a way, because it suggests that a good person operating in a system designed like that can only legitimize the system to a certain extent, right? That is definitely a big thing in this book, where like you see all of these people and they're all like, I'm really creative, or I succeeded in this way, and all of it is to enforce this one thing. Even the guy who has left, who has got away from the 31st Floor and is trying to bring attention to it, doesn't realize that he can do this thing to bring attention to it, but if nobody writes about it, it doesn't happen. And not only that, by the end of the film, this is a big spoiler, but hey, I don't think that applies here. He is instrumentalized as well, where what they do is, he has a bomb hoax. They know he doesn't know anything about bombs, but they get Janssen to investigate, because they know it has to be this guy, right? Because he writes it on... The reason Janssen has such a small list of people to go through is it's written on a certificate you get when you leave the company, or work a certain amount of time in the company. So they know he won't set off a bomb. So what they do is they set everything up, and they have another threat come in at the end. And Janssen knows, or thinks he knows, that he's caught the guy, so there won't be any bomb. There won't be any bomb, and the guy didn't know about it anyway. But then he realizes this entire thing is being set up, so there is the possibility of a bomb threat. That's in everybody's head. We know which guy did it. The patsy has kind of been picked even before the crime happens, that they use this as an excuse to eliminate the 31st Floor. Even at the start of the book, there's a question that, like, should we just let the building blow up because we could get the insurance money and maybe have a better premises, is like something that's considered, you know.
It's kind of weird that they want to blow up the 31st floor as well, right? Because I guess it's a symbolic thing, really. But like the people that have decided that they're not, the people who are rebelling against them are people that have left the 31st floor and are now like operating outside. So like it wasn't clear. So at the end, as you say, like there's this new renewed bomb threat. It's not clear what actually happens. So they're both running up the stairs. Both Jansen and his assistant partner Anton. They're both running up the stairs. He abandons Anton on the stairs, and because he says he can get up there quicker, so he just kind of goes, "Yeah, all right, then you go up there." And he walks down the stairs, gets a helicopter to the top, shoots the lock on a door and goes in. We don't actually see the room. And there's like this report that he did save people, but then they died anyway in hospital. And it's not clear, was there a bomb? And like, did he save anybody?
Well, I think so personally, and you know, obviously the millions of people who've seen this film have all these theories. Well, not really, and nobody knows what the fuck happens at the end of it, right? But like, I think that there was a bomb. He tried to save people. They were obviously killed because this is a closing of a loop, right? Because as good as it is to have all these rebellious people producing all this stuff and nobody seeing it, eliminating the possibility of them is even more powerful. Like, the next level up from placating revolutionaries or whatever, even a little bit, is to just remove them, because they're the idea of rebellion, right? They're not just like the rebellious people. They are these kind of thought leaders. They're the idea of it. So they're removing even the possibility of it. I think that's it anyway. That's what it felt like to me. This definite sense of everything being... I mean, there is a very, very strange scene where the police inspector says you did... He stops telling him you solved the case and he starts saying you did the job perfectly to Jansen, and that's when Jansen realizes what's going to happen and that the whole thing was kind of set up. I mean, it is a very strange sort of setup, but... it's even in the book, it's even more remote. I think he's in his other, he calls his deputy or whatever, who is in the middle of saying, yeah, we got everyone out, but obviously there won't be a bomb, and he tells them how to avoid falling debris because he's so certain it's going to happen. But yeah, I think that's it anyway. I think this ending or whatever, it ties into a couple of Fassbinder movies. So there's one called The Third Generation, which is about, it's been a long time since I've seen it now, but it's about a terrorist group who are funded by a mysterious benefactor to kidnap this guy. Turns out to be the guy himself. He basically has himself kidnapped so more people will buy his computers, you know. And it's kind of saying that, these, you know, this funding from groups or wherever, like where does it come from? What is it for? What are they being used for? And also, there's another movie called Fox and His Friends, which Fassbinder made. It's one of the other few movies he stars in, and he plays this kind of again, this figure. It's the exact 180 opposite from Jansen. He is this really good looking, because this is Fassbinder when he's physically at his most fit, right? But he is really good looking, but he is this kind of gay carnival worker who wins the lottery, gets taken in by these kind of rich upper class guys, and ends up fleeced of all his money. Like, through class awkwardness, basically, is forced into all these situations, fleeced of all his money, and ends up literally at the end of the film is him dead with people taking the money out of his pockets and the jacket off his back because he dared move class and was eliminated from existence, right? So he is kind of the impossibility of trying to be upwardly mobile is what he is in Fox and His Friends, and then in Kamikaze he is this is what it is like to exist on your exact plane of a system, basically unwaveringly, you know. And then, of course, in Kamikaze 89, it's about to be dead Fassbinder, so he's covered in sweat and he looks like he's going to die, because he is. And it is the horrible sci-fi version of the character in Fox and His Friends, basically.
I just wanted to return to the role of the police for a minute. You mentioned before that they're generally speaking, they are dressed in white clothes, like hospital workers or psychiatric staff. And I do think they're definitely depicted as performing a psychiatric function where crime is treated as like a kind of mental disease. Like, there's something wrong with you if you can't adjust to the way society is meant to function.
Yeah, they're definitely like a state psychiatric kind of enforcement thing, right? Like, because again, talking about what all these words mean, like, no, there's no children out of marriage, and it is suggested in the book that that's partially because there's stuff in the water, and also malnourishment is one of the things that's plummeted the birth rate. But it's also like nobody is being arrested, but you never hear how many people are being institutionalized, and alcohol is illegal, but most people seem to be alcoholics, and then that's treated as an addiction rather than a crime. And I do think, like, I was reminded, I saw a picture of, I think, a tube station in London that was, I wish I could remember now exactly what it was, but it was basically like if you're experiencing some sort of like psychiatric distress or something like that, tell an officer.
Oh, right.
And this idea that police, who are for the protection of private property, are supposed to be this everything, and can easily slip into a caregiver mode, because all it is authority. It's just you can't comply to this authority is basically how it works. And I think the source material would have come out at a time when anti-psychiatry was very big. And not really, so it wasn't as folded into society as it is now in anti-psychiatry, especially in the 60s. And Per Walu, who wrote this, was kind of infamously this very, very hardcore Marxist. He later went on to write these crime novels, which are infinitely better than his novels on his own with his wife, Madge Soul, and they are actually about police officers as people, and they're always praised for being very gritty or whatever, but the big function of those books is to show the impossibility psychologically of being a person in a role like that. How they just don't reconcile.
I think it does speak to something as well, this idea of like crime or problems that people have being like a symptom of not being able to adjust properly, in the way we like ignore structural issues. Like, you have like mindfulness and all these other ways of dealing with like increased stress that like employers will often encourage and stuff. And you have all these like self-help and technique things to feel more efficient and deal with stress, ignoring the fact that it might be like low wages and difficulty getting housing and debt and economic and living conditions that actually causes these kind of problems. I think it's speaking to something there, like ignore, like you mentioned, like there's that guy who says, so we ban alcohol, then we create the conditions that drive them to drink it, then we beat them for it. And Janssen says to him, like, don't ever say that again. Which is the idea, is he's basically speaking to the structural issues that you're meant to ignore, because anything that people do wrong, it's like their failure to adjust to society.
Definitely. I really love that bit actually as well, because that isn't an avoid unnecessary comments bit. That is a just never say that again. Yeah. You can't say that. You can't say anything about structural thought. Just don't. And that mindfulness thing is so dead on, that CBT or whatever, where like I did a mindfulness course because I was unemployed and whatever a couple of years ago or a few years ago. And I remember vividly thinking that I was there partially because I had a lot of time and I was like, maybe this will help my ADHD or something like that. Right. And everyone else there had like 3 kids and was working 12 hours a day on their own company. Like it was all people who were, like at the time I was just like, wow, everyone has a lot more money than me here. That's weird. But like looking back on it, they were all people who had put themselves under the kind of stress you shouldn't put yourself under. Like it shouldn't be something you have to deal with. No. And that they were like, well, obviously what it is, how society is unchangeable, and there's no other way. Yeah. So we just have to adjust to this. The thing about us being better able to adjust to this is now we can do more work. Like that's the end. I mean, that's what all Google, that's what every startup is about. They're like, oh, we'll give you your meals for free. There's beds here. And all it is you'll never leave. Facebook is literally building accommodation now. And they're like, oh, look at this. We're really looking after our workers by essentially reintroducing feudalism. Yeah. Right? Like where they're just these indentured people in this thing. It's, this idea that you are always the problem, like in mental health in Ireland, the big campaign is Please Talk. And it puts all of the onus on the person who is suffering the issue. Even, I remember the most, and this is like something that would be in Kamikaze 89, actually. There was an advertising campaign that one of the big and the mental health organisations in Ireland did in conjunction with a tea company, it was Lions, where in the main train station in Dublin, they put a table and they had a cup of tea for everybody who'd committed suicide in the country in the last year. And they said that, and these were like branded cups, right? And they said each one of these represents a conversation that didn't happen. And I've never been more disgusted at anything, you know, because like that is on so many levels, you know, putting the onus on somebody else, saying that, oh, like, you know, the way consumerism can solve all problems, you know, if you buy this make of tea, you'll have these conversations that will stop people killing. You know, it's such an insidious thing. Mm-hmm. And that is definitely like, I mean, that it's said plainly in the film, right? As you said, you know, like we create the conditions, you know, we make alcoholism illegal, we create the conditions that drives them into it, we beat them up for that, you know, like there's plenty of stuff about the crack epidemic or whatever in the US that ties very closely even to that, you know.
Sure. Right, there's a couple of things in the film that I wanted to ask you about. Just purely a few things that I didn't understand again. So
sure.
One was so there's a bit where Janssen's attacked by cross-dressing balaclava wearing. I presume they're employed by the concern to take him out. I don't really know, but in any case, he's attacked by them and he's saved by Anton. He then sort of asks Anton to throw him his weapon as Anton goes off to pursue these people, which he does, and then he stands up in his room and then he just starts shooting around his own room. And then he points the gun at his own head and then it cuts to like the pursuit and then he's like bursting out the door, chasing them again. I just wondered if you had any idea like what that was meant to be about.
That might be, that to me, like, okay, there's the thing you could say like, oh, you know, he can't exist in this role and he might as well inflict violence on himself than somebody else, you know, because he's just part of that bigger structure. But honestly, I think that bit is in the film because it's like, look, it's Rainer Werner Fassbinder. Okay. You know, like, look, it's this guy who is this famously self-destructive artist who, like, I mean, he died because his heart exploded from doing so much cocaine, right? Like, and he did cocaine because he produced, I think on average he made 4 or 5 feature-length films a year. And these are some of the best films, you know, certainly I've ever seen. He did a 20-hour TV series that was really one film called, like the current kind of Twin Peaks, called Berlin Alexanderplatz. Like, he was this guy who wore himself out. So I think that was more of a nod at him being him, rather than, and his movies, that seems like a very him approach anyway, to be honest, because his movies have any private character moment in his films are always people doing like incredibly weird, kind of fucked up private stuff and then going off and trying to be normal again, you know?
Okay. One final thing. Do you have any idea what this, there's a repetition of this idea that's something to do with like the moon landing. So he's got a big picture of the moon landing on his wall, which he goes and like stares at some point. And like at the end of the film, we have the countdown and we have him again staring at this picture. I wondered, like, the only thing I could sort of link that to, obviously the moon landing is in some ways seen as like this symbolic moment of progress and hope for what humanity was and where it was going and what technology could do. Is that just as simple as like juxtaposing that with like the decayed reality that we find ourselves in?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably in certain respects, obviously not like when examined a lot closer, but you could regard the moon landing as the purest act of good a extremely capitalist society ever produced.
Right, okay.
You know, are like a thing that was purely, you know, driven by all of the ideals. It was an actual manifestation of all of the ideals espoused by this kind of bootstrapping, like capitalist whatever society, you know, that actually happened and was supported by, you know, everyone and was this quintessentially American, which is, you know, what the system is or whatever, or typified by it, you know, quintessentially American act of pure progress, or just purity, basically. I think I reviewed this film on all units called Top of the Heap, which is kind of about this conflicted black police officer in the 70s. And he keeps fantasizing that he is an astronaut. And part of that is that is the uniform you can put on that nobody will hate you for. You know, and I think, like, I've seen a couple of different movies where people who are in, you know, in the army or in the police or whatever are part of these state kind of superstructures. Nobody hates astronauts, you know. Like, I mean, flat earthers probably do or whatever, but like they're a pretty minuscule proportion of the population. Yeah. But like, I think that's part of it as well. That he is the total manifestation of the reality of that kind of system, and he is staring mournfully. I think he like mimes having sex with the thing at one stage, the Neil Armstrong thing, which is, again, that's just Fassbinder, I think, being him. But you know, you have one end and the other, right? Like it's total polar opposites of this kind of ostensibly the same idea.
Cool. Well, thank you for picking this film, bringing it to our attention today. I think it's certainly an interesting one. It's bizarre, but it is interesting. And like I say, I think it's got some quite prescient ideas for the time it was made. I would recommend that if people want to hear you talk more about film, they should listen to your podcast, All Units, which is really cool. It's like, well, you can describe it better than me, like a breakdown of the thriller genre, right?
Yeah, so I basically, I did this thing last year called Hundreds of Dead Bodies about horror movies. And I sort of talked about all the different aspects of horror movies, but I did it in a month and it nearly killed me. So I decided, I had the same thing planned out for another month. And then I realized I could make it slightly longer and do it for 2 years instead. So every 2 weeks I take 2 movies and I use it to talk about a different aspect of both thrillers and the themes that come up in thrillers. So the series at the moment at time of recording is Work. And I'm just looking at like how work is shown, because thrillers are one of the few movies where actual work is depicted in detail. So that's what I'm kind of talking about at the moment. And then every second week I do this thing called Calling All Units, which is much more whatever, but is vaguely around thrillers or genre film. But like, yeah, so I mean, I would appreciate if you give it thank you for saying kind stuff about it, and maybe some of your listeners might like it as well. So
yeah, I think you are doing a similar thing to what I'm doing in a sense. Like with that, it's really interesting that when you did like uniform, talking about, you know, like the symbolic power of a uniform and for the police and stuff. But yeah, it's really interesting and intelligent discussion of film, and I'd recommend it to people. So you can just search for All Units on iTunes or whatever. Is there a Twitter account people can follow?
Yeah, Come In All Units is the Twitter account, and the Facebook as well. I don't do anything with Facebook though, so good luck. But I do post on the Twitter. But yeah, I mean, the main thing is just to follow on, you know, whatever podcasting program you're using. I think at this stage, if you put in All Units, it'll come up. That's it really. I would appreciate any feedback on it, and thanks very much for listening. I really like what you're doing with your show as well. It is rare, and if I do say so myself, a little bit thankless to produce a podcast outside of the kind of set formats, but it always, to me, it's certainly what I'm trying to do, and what you are achieving always is extremely interesting and shows you the possibility of podcasting outside the kind of set formats. So.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you.
So that's the end of my conversation with Sean. Thanks for listening. As always, if you've enjoyed it, if you wouldn't mind taking the time to give me a rating or review on iTunes or whatever you use to listen to this, that does really make a difference in terms of getting the podcast more exposure, getting more people listening. Tell someone you know about it. Or, as I said in my intro, maybe take a look at the new Patreon page, patreon.com/Utopian Horizons. If you can afford to sling a quid or two my way, that would be very much appreciated. If you've got any feedback on the podcast, ideas for stuff you'd like to see me cover, you can email me on utopianhorizonspod@gmail.com, tweet me at Utopian Horizons, or get in touch on facebook.com/Utopian Horizons. As I said before, it won't be a big gap until the next episode. I've already got the interview recorded, so I just need to get that edited, and I'll probably put that out in a couple of weeks. So yeah, until then, thank you very much for listening.